Well, we unfortunately hear about car accidents seemingly every day. And in some of those cases, those crashes result in serious injuries. When that happens, it might be a good idea to consult a personal injury lawyer. It's important to be aware that for injuries to be eligible for a personal injury claim, they must meet a certain standard known as the threshold injury law. Grand Rapids car accident lawyer Tom Sinus and his firm Sinus Dramus Law Firm have been helping those wrongfully injured in West Michigan for more than a decade. Tom's back with us via Zoom this morning to discuss a topic he knows a lot about. Tom, thanks for being here.
Thanks for having me back, Todd. Nice to see you.
Absolutely. It's great to see you as well. Let's start with that threshold injury law. What does that mean?
It's a confusing concept, and largely because it really exists only in auto accidents in Michigan. And to understand why we have this rule, you have to kind of take a step back and remember a couple things that you and I have talked about over the year about how auto insurance law in Michigan is set up. Well, perhaps the most defining feature of our auto accident law is the idea that victims have access to these things called no-fault benefits. And we've talked about those at length. Coverage for medical expenses, lost wages, that type of thing. Well, when we created this system back in the 1970s, the idea here was that we were going to make certain things, like medical care, for example, easier to obtain by the victim being able to go to their own insurance company for that type of coverage. And the trade-off, so to speak, was that we were going to make it a little more difficult to pursue what I call a liability claim, you might call it a personal injury claim, against the at-fault driver. And the heart of this trade-off is the idea that a victim can only pursue one of these liability claims if they have a certain type of injury. And we call that type of injury a threshold injury. The idea here, think of it like a threshold into a room. In order to go into the room, you have to cross the threshold. You're either in or you're out of the room. Sort of the same concept here. In order to have a liability claim, regardless of how careless the other driver was, the victim has to have one of these types of injuries that we call a threshold injury.
So what types of injuries would meet that threshold? Is there a list somewhere we can look at?
It's a great question. You might think you could turn around and grab one of these books and there'd be a list of body parts, for example. It doesn't work like that. We have categories, and we really only have 3 categories, and they're general categories where perhaps individual cases would fit into. The first category, of course, the most serious, is death. Death is a threshold injury. Second category is called permanent serious disfigurement. This applies really to cases where there's been maybe serious scarring or burn injuries from an auto case. The third category is the most common, and that category is called serious impairment of body function. Serious impairment of body function. That's the third of 3 categories of threshold injuries. So, and we could talk a lot about what serious impairment of body function means, and we've talked about that in the past. It is the most common type of injury that a victim may be trying to pursue in terms of a threshold category. And they have to have one of those 3 categories in order to pursue one of these liability claims.
Well, it obviously sounds like it's not a one-size-fits-all thing. We've got different layers and different levels. Is it safe to infer that we should never assume that an injury doesn't meet the threshold?
That is safe to assume, and it's really the wisest approach. I have been fortunate to represent a lot of people over the years, and the people who come to see me, usually I'm the first lawyer that they've ever encountered, and they're not really excited about having to contact a personal injury lawyer because, of course, that means something terrible has happened. And sometimes people might say, well, I don't really want to do that. I'll just assume I don't have a threshold injury. And I would caution people, don't assume that. You can call a lawyer like me for a free consultation, and we can explain to you how these concepts work and how your case may or may not fit into that. But if you just assume that you don't have one, then that means you'll set that liability claim aside, and maybe too much time will go by before you can pursue it. What I would tell people is the heart and soul of this serious impairment of body function analysis is this. The victim has to show that the general ability to lead their normal life has been affected, not destroyed, not completely ruined, but changed, meaning the way you go about living your normal life has to have changed. And most people who have any type of serious injury will say yes. The way I've gone about maybe working or being with my family, whatever it may be, has changed. And if that's the case, all the more reason not to assume that you don't have a threshold injury. There are thousands of cases in Michigan describing, defining, struggling with this concept of a threshold injury. So certainly it's not something that anyone should just treat lightly.
Yeah, definitely something we don't want to assume or guess at or put aside. There's a statute of limitations for some of these things. So if people have questions, where can they get more info?
Well, they can find us online, of course, www.sinusdramus.com. They can give us a call the old-fashioned way in Grand Rapids at 616-301-3333, or they can send us an email at info@sinusdramus.com. We have a full-time department in our office devoted to answering the phones and emails and stuff and putting people in contact with a lawyer. And as I said, we offer free consultations. And so if you have a question, just ask. Don't assume you know the answer. You probably will feel better that you've done a little bit of homework to figure out where you might want to go.
Yeah, the peace of mind is definitely worth it to make that call for that free consultation. Sinusdramus.com for more, or as you heard, 616-301-3333.